It is Photography Banzai. Today we're taking a look at the Canon EOS 90D. Thanks to Cameracraft in Rockford, Illinois for letting me try this out at their shop. The 90D has an APS-C size sensor like the previous versions, the 80D, 70D. In this case, it is a new sensor on there, around 32.5 megapixels, so definitely a very dense sensor. I did bring along a second Canon EOS M50. It has their older 24 megapixel sensor in there, so I'll do a little comparison of image quality with that and the 90D. Of course, I'm not going to be comparing the cameras very much at all. That isn't the point of this video. In the case of the 90D, you have a traditional digital SLR, that means optical viewfinder, a autofocus system dedicated to that optical path with a mirror inside that flips up and down. However, in this case, you have all of the functionality of a mirrorless camera in there as well when you go into live view. You have the standard EF mount, which means a ton of lenses that have been out for a very long time. Of course, you cannot mount RF lenses on this camera. If you want something smaller, you might want to consider the EFM camera with the same sensor. It's the M6 Mark II. So different lenses, but you can adapt EF lenses with the proper adapter on that camera. It does have a built-in flash on this level of camera. I don't know if it's necessary, but it's in there, and if you're into that, it is definitely a nice feature for some situations. Kind of an odd thing to mention, but I do like how Canon designs their simple strap lugs. They're easy to use, they're wide, they don't have like a clanking extra piece of metal to them. There are ample ports on the camera. You've got the microphone port, headphone port, which is nice to see, cable release, mini HDMI, which is not the smallest one, so a little bigger with that HDMI port, which is nice, and the USB port. The grip on the 90D felt pretty average. It was pressing a little bit on my middle finger when I'm holding it. I think with even larger lenses that would be more of a problem. Of course, this is personal preference and how your hand is and all that, just something to keep in mind. As expected, it uses LPE6N battery, very standard. Nice to see that they didn't try to change that up. Looking in the battery compartment, I can see additional contacts in there, so there should be a battery grip option. One of the nice benefits of Canon cameras that they seem to put in quite a few of them is that very angle screen, fully articulating screen where you can face towards the lens, you can adjust it vertical, below, above. It just gives you a lot of options. Of course, that works really well with vlogging and similar situations. As expected, the back screen is fully touch enabled with menus, with the on-screen display. Definitely a very nice way that Canon sets up their touch screens on their cameras. There are ample buttons and dials on the camera. If you'd like that direct control with a physical button, you should be pretty fulfilled here with that. However, it does not have a third dial, which some cameras do have to do the full exposure triangle. So you do have an ISO button instead that you can use with the dial. It's nice to see that it has a joystick for adjusting autofocus point, and it is a button itself. If you do photography and extreme conditions, having those direct buttons is much easier to use than a touchscreen. If you are into back button focusing, there is a dedicated button for that. There is a top LCD on the camera, a traditional DSLR feature on there with a lot of buttons up there as well. Actually, you can flip the back screen back into the camera, so you can protect that and then just use the top LCD, use a viewfinder. The ISO button has a little bump on it to help you position your fingers. If you're looking through the viewfinder, you won't have to pull the camera down. On the top there, you have AF selection, standard AF button, drive mode, ISO, and metering. There is a physical Q button. With the Canon cameras, it's a quick menu that gives you a lot of options. You can either use the touchscreen to get to that or use this dedicated button on the camera. On the front of the camera, near the bottom of the grip, on the side of the mount area, there is an additional button you can adjust. On the 90D, you have one of their more somewhat traditional controls. You have a wheel with a four-way joystick plus a center button on the back, in addition to a lock that you can make sure that it's not going to change on you. The mode dial is pretty standard. You have some auto modes plus the standard PSAM. In addition to the C1 and C2 custom modes, those are always something I like to mention because you can push settings into groups, save those, adjust your settings, switch to C1 or C2. So if you're trying to do a specific type of photography, it's nice to push a group of settings into those and go back to them. With the info button, you can switch to a built-in electronic level in the camera. Just a quick note on this lens, it's one of their kit lenses with the camera. It is pretty large, but it was pleasant to use. However, I would have preferred something a little wider than 18. 18 is okay, but a little challenging to do some types of wide angle stuff on there. I would have preferred around 15 or 16 millimeters, but 18's alright. They do have the built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capabilities on the camera. You can use their Android or iPhone app. It works pretty well. It has a lot of features, a lot of functions. You can do full adjustment of settings in the camera. You can select the autofocus point through the app. So it works pretty well. Let's go over some of the menu settings and features in the camera. With RAW files, you do have a compressed RAW option, which is probably a pretty good idea with these large megapixel files. One of the more useful features on the camera has a minimum shutter speed setting related to the ISO. If you go auto ISO, you can use a minimum shutter speed so it doesn't go below that setting. Super useful in aperture priority, so the camera won't use a shutter speed too slow for what you're trying to do. You can also use an even easier feature that gives you a 7-value weighted preference if you don't want to put an exact value in there. Some of the other interesting features, you have multiple exposure mode. So if you want to join multiple photos together with either additive or average, there is an HDR mode. If you're interested in that type of stuff, it's in there. Check it out. You can go auto plus 1, 2, or 3 EV. It has an interval timer, good for time lapse, right in the camera. So you can select the amount of time between photos as well as the number of photos. The camera has a ton of features related to adjusting autofocus preferences, settings, just a lot of things in there if you want to fine-tune your autofocus settings on the camera. There is a My Menu feature on the camera. It's a way to take some settings from the menus and put them together into groups. Works pretty well in some situations. For example, when I have one of my M50s in a B-roll mode, I stick all the settings related to video in one group. So you can do the same thing with the 90D. The camera does have a built-in feature to clean the sensor, but you can pop up the mirror in a manual mode to clean it physically if you need to do that. I did take various sample photos and did some video tests with the 90D. In one case with the video, I was using the M50 and the 90D together, doing that vlogging test as usual, 3 different types. The first one I did 30 frames a second with full manual settings. The second one I did 30 frames a second with auto ISO and digital IS, that first setting, not the enhanced one. And then for the third one, I did 24 frames a second. Of course, you'll need to update your firmware in this case to get 24 frames a second, but it is now an option on the 90D. I think Canon kind of took a step back and realized that some settings, some options are important to the customers, and definitely the feedback they got was a large amount on the 24 frames a second. And they did put it back into quite a few of the cameras, which is nice to see. The 90D does have 4K modes. It's actually a full sensor version and also a crop version. So if you want really high detail and you don't care about a crop, you can use that mode, or you want the full sensor readout, use the standard 4K mode on the camera. It does have the 120 frames a second at 1080p. Not going to have autofocus or audio recording in that mode. Of course, I took various samples with the camera. I'm limited in what I can do with these cameras for these specific videos, but some samples, gonna go full view of each one and then 100% crop. Also, I'll be comparing it to the M50. Now, there'll be different megapixel sizes, just keep that in mind. I'm putting this in there because I'm curious to see how they relate. Of course, I did use different lenses. I do see this as kind of a peak of digital SLR technology with the 90D. If you have a ton of EF glass, again, the 90D is a great option for you. Now, if you're interested in using the RF lenses, getting the 90D doesn't make any sense because some of these new RF lenses are very unique and very specialized. In a way, this camera achieves kind of an ideal level of technology with both the digital SLR side, that standard viewfinder, and the sensor-based autofocus with the nice dual pixel on the sensor and all that. That was a look at the 90D. Again, thanks to Cameracraft in Rockford, Illinois for letting me try this out at their shop. It's got photography Banzai. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider subscribing. That helps me out a lot. Likes and shares help out a lot as well. Thanks again.